evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 9th episode of our weekly podcast, Just Politics, Our Worldview, where we discuss politics in Barbados, the region, and the rest of the world. Remember that you can find us here live every Sunday from 5 to 7 p.m. Each week, I am so grateful for the support that we continue to get from you, those of you who choose to join us, and also for you, Sasha Lee, who continues to manage our social media posts and marketing. Thank you for joining us and welcome again to our show. I am your host, Ayo Olalara, and this is my co-host, Dr. Terry Harris. Over to you, Terry.
Thanks, Ayo. So this week's guest is Firhaana Bulbulia, Queen's Young Leader from Barbados for 2016. She is the founder of the Barbados Association of Muslim Ladies and is a gender and communications analyst. For the past 10 years, she has worked with several local, regional, and international organizations advocating on issues of social justice and inclusion. With a strong academic background in education, gender, and international relations, she presents a unique perspective on bridging the gap between faith and politics and how diverse representation in positions of leadership makes a difference. Welcome to the show, Firhaana.
Thank you, Ayo and Terry, and to all of our viewers. I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks for being
Great
here.
to have you.
Right, so this week's episode is brought to you by Desiree Properties Inc. Constructing the Future. You can contact them at 624-0593 or email them at desireepropertiesinc@icloud.com. Ayo, over to you for the weekly roundup.
Thank you, Terry, and welcome again to the weekly roundup. In the USA, Ivanka Trump has been deposed for misuse of the inaugural funds. CNN has reported, CNN has reported, they've also reported that Trump is looking to pardon all of his children and himself preemptively. They haven't actually been charged with anything as yet, but the thoughts are that charges are imminent as soon as they leave the White House. There are numerous investigations right now into the Trump's family. Melania, Rick Gates, and presumably others have also been deposed by the Office of the Attorney General. So what do you think, Terry? Will one of them be charged or even imprisoned, or will they just receive pardons from Trump?
I'm hoping for 2 terms. Trump 2 terms in prison. That's what I'm hoping for.
Well, Biden has said since March that he definitely will not pardon Trump. So let's hope for the best. Yep. And Trump has lost once again. But someone who talks so much about winning, he sure does lose often. CNN has also reported that Texas has brought a case to the Supreme Court to have the 2020 presidential elections overturned, essentially to block the ballots of millions of voters in battleground states that went in favor of President-elect Joe Biden. The court order, issued with no public dissent to dismiss the challenge, is the strongest indication yet that Trump has no chance of overturning the election results in court, and that even the justices whom he placed there have no interest in allowing his desperate legal base to continue. Trump later tweeted, and I quote, "The Supreme Court really let us down. No wisdom, no courage," end of quote. On the contrary, sir, it takes both wisdom and courage to uphold the law in the face of the presidential bully whom you owe your appointment to. I don't know what he's talking about. Anyway, the Electoral College will convene on Monday to affirm Biden's win. That's tomorrow.
Thank God.
And here in Barbados, the government stepped into the dispute between G4S and the Barbados Workers Union. And the parties have reached a decision. The workers will receive an increase of a whopping 60 cents. What a win. There's also a movement, though, in the direction of raising the minimum wage across the board, but this is to be done by sector, as reported by the Prime Minister. Look, I appreciate that raising wages can potentially place companies under financial stress, especially in these times. But there are other ways that this can be mitigated, like lowering the cost of living. The cost of shipping and custom duties is damn near prohibitive. Smaller players in the market struggle with these costs. The constant struggle is to find ways to keep prices competitive. The weekly wage right now for a security officer is like $351.60. I dare anyone in the meetings last week to try to live on that wage in Barbados for 1 year. But there's good news too. The Prime Minister has assured the country that apart from the fact that the Club Barbados Resort and Spa will now pay the severed workers rather than the government vis-a-vis the NIS, operations at the NIS and the laws will be tightened to deal with the companies that make salary reductions but do not pay them into the fund. About time. But I also feel like the government must go a step further and reclaim the spaces that these businesses occupy if they claim that they cannot pay their debts. I personally think that there are some employers that have genuine financial difficulties at this time, but I also know that many may simply be trying not to waste the recession and to come out on the other side with pockets as heavy as possible. But this cannot, under any circumstances, be allowed to happen at the expense of labor. Our leaders need to make that more than lip service. They need to make it reality.
Agreed.
And now on to some of the best memes from these internet streets this week. And Anna Navarro is feeling like me. She's frustrated and she has some words for Trump and his supporters. And she said, how many more times do voters, states, courts, and electors have to confirm that Joe Biden won the election before Trump and his bootlicking enablers stop scamming their gullible supporters and cult members? Because right now, Trump is really just scamming these people to get money out of them, you know. And this Barbadian blogger was incredulous at Trump's focus. She said he got impeached. He was responsible for thousands of deaths, lost an election 12 times, and is upset that he isn't Times Person of the Year.
Well, you do know that Hitler was once Times Person of the Year, you know. I think in 1940 or 1945 or something.
You're absolutely right. And someone decided that if he wanted a Time cover, that he should have one, and here it is. And the Borowitz did an article that made me chuckle. You can check it out on the Borowitz Report for those of you who take life too seriously. It's satire, all right? Satire. Well, you know, the White House right now is a hot spot for COVID, so they're doing curbside pickup on pardons. And I also found this view of vaccines quite interesting. Many top scientists are on the autism spectrum. That's what the meme is saying, right? And then it replies, so technically autism causes vaccines, right? Since top scientists develop, anyway, it was funny to me.
A joke.
And on that note, here ends the weekly roundup. Viewers, please note that you can also ask questions and contribute to the program with your comments. Simply type them into the comment section below, WhatsApp us on 833-9886, or email us at jpourworldview@gmail.com. And please keep sharing this live, liking our page as we attempt to grow as organically as possible. You guys have been so great so far for helping us to build this platform, and we appreciate you, your help, and your support. And now on to our main program. Lovely. If you're like me, you've had very little interaction with members of the Islam community in Barbados. This evening, we want to learn a little bit more about our brothers and sisters of the faith, but predominantly in terms of how they interact politically within our society. And I should say that I am definitely non-religious, and thus my exploration this evening is purely on an intellectual basis. Guys, please be respectful with your comments in the live stream, which I know you will be, as you guys are always great. And this page usually attract members of the intelligentsia because of the topics with which we engage. So I ask you that we live up to that today.
Trump would say that we have the best people.
We do. Statistics for Islam in Barbados estimate a Muslim population of over 4,000, most of whom are immigrants or descendants of immigrants from the Indian state of Gujarat, a few immigrants from Guyana, Trinidad, South Asia, and the Middle East, as well as about 200 native-born persons constitute the rest of the growing Muslim population or community, representing about 1.5% of our population. There's also an influence of Middle Eastern and Arab-Asian group, mainly of Syrian and Lebanese descent. There's some curiosity towards the Muslim community, mostly because communities in Barbados tend to be somewhat segregated, not by law, but groups tend to separate. And of course, even within the broader groupings, there may exist further segmentations based on other particularities that persons from the out groups really may not even be aware of. And thus we can have the phenomenon of different sects. Growing up in Rastafarian, for instance, those who would be less informed would see anybody with dreads as Rasta, but those within the movement, of course, would know differently and recognize that those who simply wear the hairstyle or the different sets they belong to those who were ultra religious or belonging to the different houses. But there's a common thread that runs throughout many fringe faiths. And what I mean by that is those faiths that tend to be non-Christian. And that is that there tend to be little involvement in the political process of the state by its members, to the point where many do not actually vote because they don't see the outcome affecting them on an individual basis, because they're being supported and protected by their wider community. And the same can be said, I think, of the Islam community. Farhaana can correct me on that. I can count on one hand, though, those who are visibly involved in our political process. And this is not to say that there aren't others, maybe sitting on committees, etc., and helping to effect change. So this is one of the things that we will discuss today. So my first question to you, Farhaana, is about the history of Islam in Barbados, the different sects, if they exist, their involvement in the political process through voting and other ways.
Well, once again, thank you, Ayo and Terry, for having me on the show. I think this is a really important discussion, and any discussions that allow us to bridge communities is something that it can bring about meaningful impact, I think, in just connecting us and growing our understanding. I think you offered a very wonderful introduction in terms of the statistics. Muslims in Barbados are a diverse group. I think more of the noted presence of Muslims has been in a book published by author Sabir Nakuda, Bengal to Barbados, which really details the history of East Indian migration to Barbados and how we began to form communities here. But and by extension to that is, as you said, there is within the Muslim community diversity from persons of Middle Eastern, African, other Caribbean countries that essentially make up who we are. So indeed, we're not a homogenous group of individuals. Within Barbados, I will look at perhaps two strands. One of the more well-known strands of Muslims coming, which is the migration from India in a place called Gujarat to Barbados, and then the migration of Muslims through the transatlantic slave trade, which is a lesser known. So during the time of the transatlantic slave trade, it's noted that approximately 20% of the persons who came here as slaves were Muslim. And some of these are noted in some of the reflections of plantation owners who have reflected seeing their, the slaves or the persons who came from Africa praying 5 times a day or sustaining regular prayer or even fasting. So that is part of our history that we oftentimes don't know much about or has been neglected as we begin to have these discussions. One of the more well-known is the migration of East Indians to Barbados and to the Caribbean. Within Barbados, it was slightly different to our neighboring countries of, for example, Trinidad and Guyana, because the majority of East Indians came here out of free will, out of choice, and not as indentured laborers. So this migration took place because after the post-colonial period within India, you saw families wanting a better life and wanting to make a better life. And what you saw was the males or fathers, grandfathers making the migration towards this part of the world and coming to Barbados and staying here and liking it and taking up home here. And then over time began to raise enough money and resources to then bring their families here, which then saw the consistent migration of East Indians, which continues to happen to this day, where you see persons maybe marrying persons who are from India and having spouses who come from India and so on. So that in a nutshell is how the community would have, began to take root here in Barbados.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Farhana.
What about their involvement in the political process?
Yeah. So that's actually quite an interesting topic to get into. And I know that one of the things that you mentioned is perhaps the involvement or lack of involvement, and how do we begin to make sense of that. Now, the Muslim community continues to exist as a minority community. And as mentioned, when the migration from India started to happen, one of the main sort of intentions was to make a better life and to be able to sustain yourself. So, I think in the earlier times, the focus was a lot on establishing, yourself here to be able to send money back home or to bring family here. And that was the main intention. Over time, as we began to take root here in Barbados, you began to see more involvement. And that involvement came in different ways. From the period of independence, Muslims were very instrumental and very supportive of the independence of Barbados from Britain, as they were very supportive of the independence of India from Britain. So I think that was just a natural sort of organic support. So much so that in the time of the period of independence, the Muslim community got together and gifted the cabinet table, which is still in the office on Bay Street. And if you do get a chance to, you'll see there's a small plaque on that table that said that it was gifted to then the government of Barbados, and the Honorable Barrow would have received that gift, and it's still there today. So you see, even from the period of independence, that Muslims continue to support the institution of democratic government, and that's an important note. Over time, as generations began to exist here, we're no longer first generation Indians, but second, third, fourth. There has become a stronger sense of ownership over Barbados and a stronger sense of responsibility to be part of the development of Barbados. In fact, in 1999, we had Abdul Hai Pandor, who ran in the city of Bridgetown against the Honorable Billy Miller, and he ran on a DLP ticket. So there you see that there are persons who have come forward and began to understand that. I think the younger generation, especially now in today's age, you see that more than ever before. I'd also like to make note that women have in some way been involved in politics. For example, Abida Adam was extremely supportive of Billy Miller and helped to run her campaign, and during the time of her sort of campaign, which some is lesser known facts. So the younger generation is definitely taking root and taking ownership. And if you look around, I know you would have mentioned to me in our conversations Khalil Koftiwala, who's spoken on a number of BLP platforms. Also my brother Tahir Bulbulia, who is on the Guild of Students as well as part of the League of Young Socialists, and particularly involved in the campaign of Sandra Husbands, the Honorable Sandra Husbands. But then you have other individuals who are Muslim or lesser known. For example, Tyler Gravesand, who is a Muslim and is heavily involved in politics on one of the more smaller and lesser known parties. But then you also have girls, I think, and that's part of the narrative that is left out entirely. In fact, there is now a program called Pink Parliament, which is by the Barbados Youth Development Council, Life in Leggings, and the Women and Development Unit at Open Campus, that takes girls through a year-long program of leadership and advocacy training with the intention that they're preparing them to one day become parliamentarians. And this program started last year, and around approximately 8 Muslim girls between the ages of 14 to 20 would have taken part in that program. So you're beginning to see now an interest and an ownership of the development of Barbados, and it's now being translated past a business and community level to more of a political leadership involvement.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Farhana. So I would have pointed to the small size of the Muslim community in Barbados, and you would have pointed to its genesis. So what are since it's introduction to Barbados, what are some of the main contributions that you can point to that the Islamic community, the Muslim community has contributed to, life in Barbados? What are some of the main contributions? I'm thinking in terms of like culture and business. You just mentioned business. So what are some of the main contributions you can point to?
Yeah, I think one of the earliest contributions, and particularly I think one of the when persons think about the Muslim community, think about persons who are very versed in business and that the ability to do business very well in Barbados. But I think on that on that same stream is the ability to give back to your community and empower the community through business. Very early on, particularly in the sort of post-independence period, where some of the working class did not have access to things like credit or the ability or the resources to gain, or pay for items or acquire items, the Muslim community would have sold items on credit without interest, may I add, and had very payment over long periods of time of very small payments, which allowed persons to be able to gain items for their family, perhaps school supplies of clothing, things that they can then go and resell in their own communities and their own stores. And that created a very strong bond where the concept of the coolie man, and persons often think this is a derogatory term, but in Barbados it isn't so much so that in itself is a completely derogatory term, but it's a term that is referred to someone who will take their items and go into the countryside and allow persons who may not be working for as much or not be working at all to access goods and services that they may not have otherwise, because of sort of the society that evolved post-independence or post-colonialism. So I think very early on, that was a very important contribution that the Muslim community made, because they offered an alternative to what perhaps the other, what would have been otherwise offered by, perhaps the majority of the ruling class, for example. Pardon?
What may not have actually been offered at that time, because it was a case of like a form of like microfinance, and a lot of the literature now is suggesting that does help particularly poor and working class people to get a hand up, right, to get themselves more equipped with the amenities of life. But anyway, I didn't want to interrupt your flow, so go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, well, my grandfather, he passed away about 2 weeks ago, but he would always tell us when he first came to Barbados how he would trek long into the country, and sometimes persons would not be able to pay, and he would go back home. Sometimes he would say it would be okay, it would end up being a gift to that person eventually if they found that they weren't able to eventually point. He can see the conditions that the persons were living in. So it wasn't necessarily always for gain. It was more so about just being able to establish yourself and build and be a part of a community. I think as we began to grow and businesses began to grow, the Muslim community would have established religious places of worship, which then were able to do charitable work. And the concept of charity is one of the pillars of Islam. It is, a responsibility of every single Muslim that part of their wealth goes into charity. That is hands down, and it's not charity into an institution, it's charity directly into the hands of persons who are poor. And that can be done through food, clothing, money, just giving back. And throughout the years, that has been very, very noted, I think. Even during the COVID-19 period, all of the mosques on the island would have been giving out hampers of food items, clothing items, vouchers, and that is essentially the contribution that is made through community service and the development of business and education, I think, because, the ability to know the diversity in in a country sometimes relies on the minority's ability to speak about it. And had we not be able to build those bridges and be able to come on shows like this, or welcome the opportunity to come on shows like this, then the Barbadian community will continue to be very segregated in a sense. So that is also sort of a contribution or a responsibility that we've upheld, to be able to open those lines of communication.
Excellent. I was actually privy to the donations and stuff that were made during COVID, so I can definitely attest to that. I know for a fact that they were definitely giving out a lot of hampers and food items, and you know, helped a lot of people during that period of time. Kudos to them. And on behalf of the people of Barbados, let me thank you for that at this time. As a woman, and as a woman in Islam, that comes with, that comes with many societal perceptions and misconceptions, mainly about the things that you're allowed to do, or better put, the things that you're not allowed to do. There are views that the faith is oppressive to women. You, however, are a leader in your community, in our community really, being the founder of the Barbados Association of Muslim Ladies, and many other things that you've done. Your CV is vast and impressive. Are there notions that women in your community that, about women in your community that you want to dispel? And also you can probably tell us what the aim of your association is, but I really want you to answer the question, you know, about if there are notions in your community about women that you want to dispel. Here is a place to do it, because we're open and no judgment here.
Of course. So as I said, the community, the Muslim community in Barbados is predominantly of East Indian heritage. So with that comes a number of cultural, you know, sort of traditional concepts or perceptions around women in leadership, families, and so on, that becomes hard for the average Barbadian who may not understand the difference between Islam and an Indian culture, and then begin to pair the two together. And I think it's very important to be clear in distinguishing between what is culture and what is religion. So oftentimes you would see someone, and I have many friends who would have reverted to Islam, and they're Black Barbadians who then, when they begin to start wearing the hijab, many persons would say, well, wait, you're Indian now? And then it begins, the conversation is then, no, I'm not Indian, I'm Muslim. And being Indian is an ethnicity, and being Muslim is a matter of religion and faith. So there's a distinguishing between the two. So what has happened is, over time, you begin to see that what is culture is then upheld as religion, and persons even internally find it hard to distinguish between that. And the Barbados Association of Muslim Ladies was set up to be able to teach Islam and the empowerment of women apart from what culture teaches. It is mainly about what does the role of women in Islam look like on its own, without those cultural sort of barriers that are placed. And I think that because of that, women, because of those cultural sort of norms that have been upheld, women then, and men especially, begin to think, this is what my religion teaches. So then what it takes is for us to sort of peel back those layers and say, no, this is not what, you know, the religion says. This is just culture, and we need to have these conversations. So you would see that within Indian culture, and if you look at sort of the landscape of where India is, even if you're Christian, if you're Hindu, if you're Muslim, some of the expectations of women are very similar, because that is what the culture sort of the culture dominates that type of thinking. So in Barbados, you see that because we remain a very migrant community that is very strongly connected to India, and then those values and those cultural traditions remain. So women are seen as persons who are very subservient, or maybe don't have a voice, or powerless, whom are not allowed to be involved in, you know, or be civically engaged, and those type of things, which if you look at the religious texts of Islam and the history of Islam, women have always been very involved in the functioning of the mosque, of the business, of the schools, just within society as a whole. Women have always been involved and in many cases even led. So those are the type of conversations that we would have at the Barbados Association of Muslim Ladies, and bringing those sort of nuances into play and into focus.
So, Firhaana, tell us more about this foundation, the Barbados Association of Muslim Ladies. Where exactly did you found it, and what is it generally about beyond, I guess, educating women on Islam? What is it about, and where did you found it?
So during my teenage years, I think that I would have experienced a number of situations, particularly with the girls in my community, where we weren't allowed to do certain things. We weren't allowed to go out. We weren't allowed to, have our views heard. We weren't allowed to, go to the mosque. And I would question that consistently, because the way that my family raised me, my mom, my dad, my grandparents, was not in that way. It was always about Islam and not necessarily about culture, but more about Islam. So I questioned that a lot, and because of me questioning that and seeing things take place, I became very angry. I think as a teenager, I became very angry at what was happening, because even when I tried to speak out, or when, I tried to question, it was always met with, this is just the way it is. And it's going to take a lot to just change it, because these institutions are so hardened. And to me, that was unacceptable. So when I left secondary school and I started university, there were only very few Muslim girls at university at that time, and I felt very alone. I felt conflicted. I felt, if I don't fit into this mold in my community of what a woman should be and act, then where else do I fit? There's no other alternative. So in November, about 2 months after I started university in 2010, I thought, what, it's time to, open a space for that. And so I started a Facebook page called the Barbados Association of Muslim Girls. And, within a matter of weeks, we had about 200 to 300 women and girls, joining the page and very interested in what happens next. So then we were able to have our first meeting, and that's when we kind of changed the name to the Barbados Association of Muslim Ladies, because it was recognized that we needed a space not only for girls, but for women, and an intergenerational space that can sort of bring together those conversations. When we first started, it was mainly social activities that we did. It was just about providing a safe space for girls to express themselves, for us to get together to talk about issues. And over time, that transformed into something that is what we see today, where we look at advocacy and community service and educational and professional development as all part of our mandate of what we do.
So do you find that you were able to make changes within the community via your use of the association, or do you find that there was some resistance to your advocacy in that regard?
There was tremendous resistance, and I think any activist would tell you, or any advocate would tell you, that people are very comfortable, even if it is not in their favor, even if it is not, makes them happy, change is still, uncomfortable. But I would say that my advocacy is not alone. We have a team at BAML, about 11 women and girls, who are all strong and exceptional women. And you can go to our website, www.bamlbb.org, and look at the profiles of each of these women, because I alone can't fight the change, and we together form a group of a support system that allows us to advocate and make that change. And we have seen change. We have seen change on multiple levels. So at the community level, we have women who are now open to talking about issues of mental health, of abuse, of trauma, of, you know, the fact that Islamically, we should have spaces for women to pray in a mosque. These are the type of conversations that 10 years ago, we would not have had. You know, it was deaf silence. No one would have come out and supported. And now today, you have women who are unafraid to make their voices heard. And girls who are now coming up who want to be involved in programs like Pink Parliament and make a change and be leaders in their own right. So that's very important. I mean, at a national level, I think when you think about Islam, we got a comment the other day that when the person thinks about Islam in Barbados, they think about BAML and they think about, you know, what Muslim women are doing to contribute back to the society and connect communities and bridge communities together. And then you also see the adoption of a new law that allows for the religious head covering. And, you know, that was done partially by the advocacy of the Barbados Muslim Association, but then also the hard work and the efforts of the women who over the years have come out and advocated strongly, who've engaged MPs, who've written letters, who've done sensitization events to get that legislation, you know, passed. So you've seen these changes that have signified, you know, that Muslim women are here, we're present, we have a voice, and we want to be leaders in our own right.
And that you're going to use that voice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This photo that you chose to use, that we chose to use really, because you were sending me some photographs, and the one that we used in your profile of you wearing a hijab and the covering, I think the two of them have different names, I think. And you were protesting at the Black Lives Matter march. And I remember I told you at the time I was going to use this because it was really a powerful shot. I want you to tell us more about that. Why your involvement was important to that political, because that is a political movement, which from face value has little to do with your community, and they say face value on purpose. So I want you to tell us a little bit more about that.
So the picture that you chose where I had the mask, that was just for COVID-19 reasons. Although there are women who would cover their faces, and that would be called the niqab. What I'm wearing now is called the hijab. So, but
I was trying to.
The fact that I had on the mask was just, you know, adhering to COVID-19 protocols.
I was trying to explain the difference between the hijab and the niqab to Ayo earlier. So thanks for clarifying that.
Why they meaning different names?
That's okay. The niqab is the face veil that covers the face, and the hijab just covers the hair and the neck and the chest. So that's the distinguishing between the two. But yes, I was very present at the Black Lives Matter march, along with some of my sisters in BAML. And BAML as an organization came out in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, as did several other Muslim-led organizations across the Caribbean and the world. I think there was no Muslim organization that I saw that came out not in support, because at the root of Islam is the ability to respect diversity and honor that diversity and that sense of justice, that if your brother or your sister is being oppressed, you have a responsibility Islamically to stand up for that, and on the day of judgment you will be counted for that. You know, you'll be counted for why you didn't stand up if you didn't. And I think that's very important to know. So Islamically, you know, the concept of Black Lives Matter and the empowerment of a community that has been disempowered for so long means that you must be involved and your voice must be heard, and in a meaningful way. So for me, it was just a sense of responsibility. But in addition to that, you know, my ancestry, I also have, within my ancestry, I have African roots. So my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, she was you know, a Black Barbadian of African heritage. And at face value, a lot of persons don't know that, but our communities are a lot more connected than we see. And it's important to know our history. So when you know your history, you know what you stand for, and you then, you know, act in accordance to that.
Totally agree with you. I want to ask a question, if Terry will permit me. I know you have some questions, but I want to ask a question from the audience. Tatu's asking two questions, so I'll answer one first. She's asking, could Farhana tell us about the educational programs?
Within the Barbados Association of Muslim Ladies, or
I guess is what
she didn't specify.
But yeah, I'll just, while you're answering that, I'll just share the website to the audience. So again, it's www.bbl.
Right.
You can check it out there.
She does mean the AML. She specified that.
Okay, sure. So in 2015, we had a conversation called Breaking Barriers at BAML, where we had women and girls within the community come out to just talk about issues. And one of the issues that was discussed was the fact that there were fees being instituted at the University of the West Indies by the previous government. And therefore, there was a concern that because there were no fees, that girls' education or higher education would be negotiated. And that was very much the case. In fact, for my master's thesis, I looked at higher education amongst girls in the Muslim community and the factors that affected that. And one of the major findings from that research was that the fact that girls feel that they have to negotiate their education, mainly because of the fact that there's expectations to get married. There's expectations that if they want to pursue education, it has to be something significant like medicine or law, and things like psychology or humanities or, you know, other subjects are not seen as valuable. So there was also concern with how they will pay for their education, because if they come from families that don't value the education. So that was really a real concern at the time. So what we started was our Educate Girls campaign and our Educate Girls Fund, which was a flexible grant that allowed girls to access higher education or just post-secondary studies. So girls who may not have CXCs but are past the age of being in school can access the grant to then go on to get their CXCs. It pays for things like laptops, stationery, even safe transportation if it's needed. So it's a flexible grant. So that's our Educate Girls grant, particularly for Muslim women and girls in Barbados. So then in addition to that, we have sort of sensitization programs where we look at important topics, often taboo topics, so things that we do are seminars, workshops, campaigns, which are intended to educate the Muslim community about different topics that are not often spoken about. But then by extension, we have educational and outreach programs to the wider community on what Islam is, the hijab, and, you know, Muslim women, and so on.
All right, well, thanks for that. I guess I'll...
I hope that answered Taitu's question.
Okay, yeah. The next question that she had was, and this is Taitu, because apparently I've been pronouncing her name incorrectly, and I do apologize because I do hate when people pronounce mine incorrectly. But she's asking, do girls get resistance or cooperation from public schools in being able to adjust their uniforms? According to Islam, is tolerance an issue?
Actually, so about a few years ago, well, more than a few years ago, because this was about 20, maybe 30 years ago, there was, you know, in a girl who wanted to attend secondary school with her hijab, and it became an issue, a national issue, because the school was not allowing her to do it, and it made the headlines at that time. And that's when we began to, you know, at that time, have more conversations around the allowance of certain dress and so on. And since that time, public schools especially have become more accommodating of those requests, generally speaking. And girls, you'll see, are allowed to wear their hijab. They're allowed to, you know, wear a longer skirt or pants to school, which speaks volumes to the ability of Barbados to accommodate and be accepting of differences. So I would say on a whole, schools, public schools, are very, very accommodating of that.
Yeah, I think so too. Go ahead, Terry.
Any more questions from the audience?
No, that's the last one from the audience. Just some comments, and people are really liking the conversation. They think it's very informative, and I do agree with them. Tetu said that she liked her answer, and that's about it. We're not getting a lot of questions today. I think people are just literally listening because they're like me. They don't know a lot about the Muslim community, so they're really here listening for you to tell them about about it.
Okay. All right, so Firhaana, so tell us about your...
Sorry, Terry. You guys still keep the questions coming as much as possible. Don't be afraid to ask anything within reason. You understand? Yeah. Go ahead, Terry.
Firhaana, so what's next for you? What are some of your upcoming projects, and what's next for the association?
So for next for BAML, one of our main focuses, so we would have just celebrated our 10th anniversary in November, which was a huge milestone for us. Obviously with COVID, we weren't able to celebrate it, you know, in person, but we were able to do a number of things online, which made it meaningful for us. So I definitely encourage everyone to go to our Instagram page, our Facebook page, we're also on Twitter, and look at our 10th anniversary video and see, you know, what we've been up to for the past 10 years. But for us, one of the main topics that we're interested in looking at, especially for next year, is gender-based violence. And how do we support men, women, families, girls, boys in our community to deal with the issue of gender-based violence? And how do we sort of create support systems that over time begin to tackle some of the social, you know, norms and inequalities that exist that perpetuate that violence to happen. So we have our hotline that we're hoping to expand, a number of trainings that we would like to do, as well as a campaign that we would like to launch. So early next year, we'll be very busy with those activities.
All right. The Muslim community has been embraced there in politics, especially now with this government. There's a lot more movement happening there. Where would you like to see this go? And I was gonna ask you earlier if you do you think a Muslim would ever run for politics? Forgetting, of course, that one did many moons ago. But is this something that we would see again in the future? Would we see people, Muslim community get him more involved in elective politics? Maybe yourself, who knows? How much of a development there would you like to see?
I think definitely. I think the younger generations now who have been born and bred in Barbados, and as I said, have that sense of ownership. As myself, have that sense of ownership and responsibility to contribute significantly to the development of Barbados. You will begin to see that. And I think one of the sort of confirming, you know, aspects is that if you look in places like Trinidad and Guyana, where Muslims have had a much stronger sort of representation over the years than Barbados, you'll see that in Trinidad and Guyana, you have Muslims who have consistently ran for political office. In fact, in Guyana now we have a Muslim who's head of state, the Honorable Irfan Ali. So, well, so, you know, if you look to the wider Caribbean and you see how much more established Muslim communities have begun to develop and their involvement in politics has begun to develop, you can expect that within Barbados, it will continue, you know, very similarly. And you will see that a lot of the younger generation, boys and girls, will begin to sort of take that leap and put themselves up for a position because they see the value of being part of the change that needs to happen and contributing to the development of Barbados.
Interesting. When we first posted your profile, and you had a statement in there about bridging the gap between the faith and the state, and we got some questions on that post about the separation of church and state. Would you like to go into that a little bit and talk about exactly what is it that you meant when you made that statement in your profile?
I think there's often a common misconception around what Islamic leadership looks like, or what Muslim leadership looks like, or what Muslim leaders should do and act. And I think that those conversations are often dominated by the media and what the media wants persons to see. So that when you see someone like myself, or another Muslim brother or sister speaking out, or commanding a leadership position, you begin to get comments around, what sort of agenda do they have, or, linking it in some way to, terrorism and those type of conversations. So for me, it's about steering the conversation away from that and showing other examples of leadership throughout the world where Muslims are leading in democratic governments and secular states, and doing exceptionally well at that, and not allowing the mainstream media to dominate those conversations around Islam and politics, so to speak. So I hope that answered your question, but we can discuss further.
What are some of the other, you mentioned misconceptions. What are some of the other misconceptions that you can point to? So there are misconceptions with regards to, particularly with the media talks about Muslims wanting to participate in politics. We know, I think it's in 2014, there was a big ruckus in Barbados concerning some development. I think I remember. What are some of the other misconceptions and issues that you would like to point to that are problematic and that paint the wrong picture of Muslims in your view?
I think one of the other common misconceptions is that if someone who identifies as being a Muslim wants to take on a position of leadership, it is linked to an ulterior motive, or a motive around, imposing religious values on the persons that they lead. Right. And that is often the conversation that then takes place. So that when you saw the fact that we had a mosque being built within the Claremont area, and that became an uproar because it was this, there was a persons felt threatened. Persons who were of other faiths or persuasions may have felt threatened about that. So you begin to have that mentality that persons need to, hold on to their values and not allow persons who are different or bring diversity into places of leadership, because there's a fear that when you do so, that person will then impose their beliefs or their practices upon you, and not allow you to have the freedom to act or believe or practice in the way that you want to. So that's another common misconception, particularly around, looking at Muslims in positions of leadership.
Barbados is a special place. I've always felt that. I know I may criticize certain things in my country, but I think that certain things need to be talked about. But I'm extremely patriotic. In fact, it's why I criticize certain things that happen in this country, because I simply want us to be better. But I think that we are indeed a beautiful country. I think that we are unique. And I want you to talk about growing up here, because you did grow up here, right? I want you to talk about growing up here. If you've always felt safe, if you've always felt free, I want you to talk about that a bit. And I'm not talking about within your faith. I'm talking about as a member of your faith, existing in the wider community.
I think I struggled a lot with that, particularly in primary school, because I went to primary school around the time of 9/11, and Islamophobia was heightened at that point in time, to the point where, my mom and I were in the gas station one day, and this man, he clearly followed us to the gas station, and when we got there, he began to be very verbally abusive towards us. Similarly, when you take into account, you know, the experiences of my sisters and so on, they weren't able, some persons have been barred from taking the bus, for example, or, you know, not being allowed to exist peacefully, that when they walk down the street with a hijab or, you know, sit in a public place, persons become verbally abusive towards us. And more so, I think, women more so than men, because we are visibly, you know, because we dress very differently, we are visibly Muslim. So we bear that burden a lot more than perhaps our male counterparts might, because they can blend in maybe a little bit better. So I think at a younger stage, it affected me greatly. I tried very hard to fit in, where I felt I needed to change myself to fit in. I honestly, you know, in secondary school, I didn't want to wear the hijab. I felt like it made me stick out like a sore thumb. I had no sort of, you know, love for it, because it brought with it the fact that I was different. It meant that persons can, you know, bully me. They can say what they want. It made me sometimes a target, and I didn't like that. But then as I grew older, and I think when I started university, and it opened my mind and it opened me to spaces where persons thought differently, and I began to love it and love who I am, and walk into that. So for me, that was sort of the experience that I had growing up, and it has been challenging. I think it has been challenging, and had it not been that, maybe I wouldn't be sitting here today, you know, talking about these issues, had I not experienced that.
You find that these experiences that you had are would be really reflective of female experiences within the Muslim community in Barbados broadly? Do you think that this is a endemic problem that we have in Barbados, or well, do we still have it in your view, where young Muslim girls will be feeling under threat moving in throughout the society? Do you think that's still the case? And do you think that this is reflective of views that other, well, you're the head of the association, so you should be able to tell.
So I think this question is kind of twofold, because we have to talk about the experiences of women on a whole. And, you know, to say singly that this is absolutely unique to Muslim women, I mean, yeah, there are certain elements that are unique to us, but if you look at women on a whole and how we experience, you know, harassment, you know, or just you know, violence, or become particularly vulnerable in certain spaces, then I think that's across the board. Generally, women are the more vulnerable targets. So I think that in that in itself means that there are certain risks that become expanded when you are then different in a space, visibly different in a space. I would say that generally in Barbados, we feel very safe. We feel very secure. Comparatively, Barbados is a very welcoming place. I think it's only when very specific things are discussed that you begin to see mainly persons on social media sort of bringing a narrative of discrimination and, you know, Islamophobia and all of those things mixed together. But largely, I think Barbados is a peaceful place to live for persons who are diverse, in terms of how we can exist within society, and the ability of communities to be bridged. Barbados is a good example of that comparatively, I think.
And you've lived here your entire life? You were born here and lived here?
Yeah, I was born here. I did spend a few years in Trinidad. My experience has been mainly in Barbados.
And from your experience as well, did you find that people would, if you were being accosted or abused or assaulted in some way, right? Mainly by, I guess, men in our society who still can't learn to behave themselves. Would you find others in the community stepping up and supporting you at that point in time? Or do you find that no one cares?
within the wider Barbadian society? Or, oh yeah, for sure. I think generally in Barbados we have a strong sense of, you know, respect and, you know, appreciation. And when an example that I can speak to where I personally had an outpour of support was I had a situation on board a Virgin Atlantic flight where white male who was coming to Barbados as a tourist, he would have assaulted me by hitting me in my head to raise my seat up and not recline it. And at the time, the stewardess, you know, they took, in my opinion, they took his side and they didn't deal with the matter in the best way. And I then spoke out about it on social media after not getting anywhere with the Virgin Atlantic authorities. And the outpour of support that was given, I think, was exceptional. And the fact that Barbadians can see that and see us within our diversity as having ownership. You know, I was no longer just a person, a different person. I was a Barbadian, and this had happened to me, and this is not right, and we need to stand up for each other. So that's an example that I have that is very negative in a sense, but the reaction was very positive. And I think that's a testament to the work that the Barbados Association of Muslim Ladies has done, but also the Muslim community and just our connection with the you know, wider society and those relationships that we've built and sustained over the years.
Do you think that there is room for more education of the public in terms of Islam? I mean, Barbadian public, that is, in terms of Islam and, you know, what that means, and to help to this, because I will tell you that there's still a lot of notions that still exist that aren't necessarily true or maybe even real. Do you think that there's room for more education, and how do you think that we can go, that you can go about it? What can you do?
I think there's room for education on all other faiths, as you know, all other faiths. I think, in addition to Islam and other faiths that are not Christian, I think we have to recognize that we are a diverse society. We like to say that, you know, this is a Christian society, and yeah, we are predominantly a Christian society, but more importantly, we are a diverse society, and we have to be able to talk about the diversity that we have here within our landscape, because to be able to do that means that we have to look at our history, and the young people need to know our history. Had I not known mine, I wouldn't know that I have Irish and African ancestry, which are two other groups. The white and black Barbadians are two other groups, in addition to East Indians, that make up the landscape of Barbados, and we begin to see those connections. So I would say, in addition to Islam, it's just sensitization on the faiths that exists within Barbados and those histories associated with that.
Okay.
Any other questions from the audience? Ayo?
No, I was actually just checking, so you can go ahead and ask a question if you want, while I check over here.
I just have a comment, because I just want to thank you again for coming, Firhaana, because the discussion that we just had concerning your particular experience as a Muslim woman, you know, growing up in Barbados, and how you felt, and, you know, the vulnerable position that you would have been in, I would not have thought that, you know. And it's important that you guys come out and, you know, let the society know how you are treated in public, so that we can be more cognizant of these type of behaviors. Because, I mean, now that you mention it, it makes sense. You know, Barbados is a place where the random woman walking on the street can be vulnerable. So far less a Muslim woman, right? So thank you very much for sharing that and for bringing that to our wider attention.
Okay. I want you to tell us a little bit more about the award that you received from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. What it was about? You know, what did you do to earn that award? Yeah, just tell us about it.
So I was awarded, well, I was nominated for the Queen's Young Leaders Award in 2015, and I was subsequently awarded for the Educate Girls and so the Breaking Barriers Project and the Educate Girls campaign under the Barbados Association of Muslim Ladies. So the work that we were doing at the time around that was sort of the basis of the award that I received. And that meant I went to the UK in 2016 and received that award from Her Majesty the Queen, and engage in extensive program that around leading change in the Commonwealth. So that was in a nutshell, what the award was about. Additionally, at that time, it was awarding 60 young leaders from throughout the Commonwealth, and that program lasted for about 4 years. So I think the last set of awards were given out last year, if I'm correct. Yeah.
Okay. There's another question I want to ask you. I'm not intended to be provocative. I really do have an interest in this. What are your views on feminism?
So I think this is an interesting question because on one hand, you would have persons who, you know, you see Muslim women and you see them being particularly, you know, outspoken, and you automatically think, you know, is this person a feminist? Does feminism and Islam go together, and so on? But if you understand Islam and you understand, for me, my religious values form the basis of everything that I do. So when we have the conversations around, is Islam a feminist organization, then when you look at the history of Islam, it gave rights to women long before the Western world gave rights to women. You know, divorce rights, you know, rights on ownership, in business of land, you know, ownership over one's body and decision making, in leadership, and you have numerous examples even in the Quran, in the scriptures, of women. For example, Mary, peace be upon her, the mother of Jesus, who has an entire chapter in the Quran, you know, who speaks about her, as well as the Quran has an entire chapter dedicated to women and what, you know, the status of women. So I think that's, for me, knowing my faith and having those conversations, I think my background in gender allows me to begin to look at Islamic scholarly texts in a way that I can then begin to see how Islam truly raises the status of women, which perhaps is less spoken about.
Okay. You from time to time when you were talking, you would mention, you know, the younger generation in Islam, and how differently they look at certain things as opposed to the more traditional views of the older generation. Do you want to go on a little bit about that and tell me how, you know, some of these things that you view differently? I mean, I can tell you that I'm pretty sure that millennials the world over see the world much differently than the boomers, right, Terry? We do. So I'm going there again. So y'all won't let me be great, but anyhow. So,
you were a Zennial. We had settled that you were a Zennial.
That made me great. So tell me a little bit about some of the things that you view differently to the older generations in your faith and in your community in general.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that I view differently are perhaps a lot of the cultural aspects or traditions that don't make sense to me, particularly the ones that are repressive towards women. Because I am born and bred in Barbados, and my culture is sort of a fusion of what Barbadian culture is, and Indian culture is, and so on, I begin to question a lot, and the younger generation question a lot. So things that perhaps my grandmother or even my mother may have held, I think to myself, no, this doesn't make sense to me. I want to know why. Why do I have to act in this way? Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to, So it causes the younger generation to look deeper. I think one of the things that the younger generation have made clear, particularly girls, is there is a tradition within Barbados, or in the majority of the mosques, not in all mosques, that the women can't pray in the mosque. And this, you will see this largely within, Indian Muslim communities. And the younger generation, when we have conversations, this is unacceptable because this is not Islam. This is not what Islam says. This is a tradition of culture, and we need to be able to change that. So I think very high on the list is that, in fact, for BAML, for our 10th anniversary, we had a 10th anniversary survey where we asked women and girls to list the issues, and the fact that there was no, the majority of mosques did not have spaces for women was listed as the most important issue of our for affecting Muslim women in Barbados, in addition to mental health. So that speaks volumes as to where we're at and the thinking of the younger generation now.
Mm-hmm. But you know what I find amazing too is that a lot of the issues that you mentioned this evening from the beginning until now, you spoke about trauma, you spoke about abuse and so forth, and those issues that you discussed, and those issues aren't far removed from my community and other communities within the state. Tai 2, she's asking, are there any connections between being made with other Muslim women's associations or organizations in other Caribbean countries? And if so, what does that look like? That's a good question.
Yeah, so what you would find in other Muslim communities across the region is that some of their main Muslim organization would actually have a women-led department, so to speak, or a wing or a focus. For example, if you look at the Central Islamic Organization of Guyana, is one of the main Islamic institutions in Guyana that does similar work to BAML. You would see that one of their pillars is around women's involvement, women's empowerment, and that is very much women-led. Similar with Trinidad, and even in smaller territories like Jamaica and Antigua, you have within the main, body, Islamic body, you have those sections dedicated towards women and the needs of women. Unfortunately, within Barbados, the main group, which would be the Barbados Muslim Association, that is largely, that is run by males, and males have a say in, the decisions that are taken, which is why then me and for the women involved in BAML becomes so important, because we singly cater to the needs of Muslim women and advocate on the issues for Muslim women. So we create that space, but we are in no way, connected to some of the other bodies that exist, some of the other institutions that exist. We exist very disconnected from that, which is interesting given how it plays out in the rest of the Caribbean.
So could that also be next on your agenda to strengthen the linkages between these groups, so you can better advocate for your the issues within the Islamic community yourself? You said high on the list for you guys is having a space within the mosque for the females to be able to pray and to participate in worship there. So so do you think strengthening the links between the different associations around the region, do you think that could also help in promote your cause?
Yeah, so we actually have strong links. I think I didn't touch on that in my answer, and I'm sorry about that. But yeah, so we do have particularly strong links to the other sisters, where we share knowledge and resources and experience. So in fact, for the sisters organization in the Bahamas, when they were now getting off the ground, we helped them develop their constitution and gave them some advice. Similarly, in Guyana, we have a sister there who leads the wing, who's come here and offered talks for us a few times. And in Trinidad, where they had the Muslim Youth Leadership Conference, we were able to send 2 females representatives there to participate in that and build those connections. So I would say yes, definitely we're very connected, and they're very supportive of the work that we do. In fact, when we were advocating about 2 years ago for women's spaces in the masjid, we got letters of support from our counterparts across the Caribbean who became very vocally supportive of the movement for that. So yes.
Are they facing similar issues in Trinidad, in Guyana? Do they face similar issues there? Or?
Regarding women's places in the mosque, no. I think the majority of mosques across the other Caribbean countries, even if they're small, places in a house, have spaces for women. I actually went to Antigua about a year ago, and their mosque is similar to they have a very modest mosque. This is a very small community there, and even in the modesty of the mosque and how it's built, they have a dedicated space for women. They have dedicated washrooms and facilities. So there really is no excuse.
Right. Well, hopefully these things will change. And with your activism, I'm sure these things will change.
I know you guys have, sorry, you go on. I know you guys have Muslims, either a Muslim school or Muslim schools. You can correct me. How much different is it or are they from our schools here? I mean, we do have the experience of private schools, so I know that schools outside of the public schools do exist, right? But I'm just asking specifically about Muslim schools because this is a religious school now. Although we do have Christian schools there too. But the point I'm trying to get to is for you, yes, you're the result of a Christian school. How different is Muslim school system, or how similar is it to the regular public schools here on island?
So the Muslim school that we have here, which is Al Falah, they follow the national curriculum of Barbados. For religious studies, they would do Islamic studies as what we teach. And generally prayers would be Islamic prayers, modes of dress would be, what is the standards expected in Islam. But generally, the curriculum that is taught follows the national curriculum. So in that sense, it's very similar to how perhaps other schools would teach their programs and roll out their programs. We also do have what would be considered the equivalent of Sunday school. So from a very young age, perhaps even from about 4-5 years old, Muslim youth would go to madrasa, which is just religious school, where we would learn the Quran and the teachings of Islam, and learn how to practice that, learn how to pray, and so on. We go through that up until secondary school. And then those who want to further their Islamic knowledge would then go on and study that at a higher level.
Okay, interesting.
And they
generally,
or do they need to go overseas to study at a higher level?
So I believe you can study up to a point in Barbados, but then many persons would go, for example, to Trinidad or to England, even some to South Africa. Some may go back to India to gain much higher educational knowledge in the religion.
Okay, thanks. Ayo, sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I guess that was kind of the question I was asking. Atetu is saying feminism is very, very young. Islam is thousands of years old. So Islam actually did that to Africa. So again?
Oh, sorry, nothing.
I think there's a point that I wanted to make on feminism. And oftentimes persons equate feminism to what perhaps the Western white dominated feminism Muslim, and I think Taitu would understand. And I think within the Caribbean setting, our Black sisters have done exceptionally well in leading the feminist movement, and we have so many wonderful examples of that. And I think for Muslim women, we're now entering these spaces where we can discuss these things. So it's really my hope that as we begin to broaden our work, that you have more Muslim women engaged, because feminism isn't and shouldn't be a single voice, and it shouldn't be a voice dominated by, you know, what Western white ideals look like, but it has to take into in consideration Black and brown voices and minority groups and minority faiths. So I would definitely say that
that's why I was asking you about your particular views on feminism, not because I identify as Black African feminist, right? And I do take into account the intersectionalities of feminism and so forth, but I that's why I was asking, what are your particular views, more so than feminism, white feminism as it's generally recognized, right? And because the idea is the idea that women in Islam are oppressed because they have to cover their hair and so forth. But as an Islamic woman, this may be a sense of pride for you. This may be a thing of pride for you. This is something that you want to do, right? So I wanted you to go in a little bit more about that. Now, at the beginning of this, I told you that this was really an intellectual exploration. For me, it really is. So don't think that I'm asking you from a position of what regular people or average people would generally, you know, with those misconceptions there. I really want you to get into those conversations a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. So for me, I think that the concept of feminism and what the wider Barbadian society, and the reason why I'm often very cautious about speaking about it is because I recognize where I stand within society. And as a Muslim woman who speaks about issues of empowerment, the moment I begin to speak about feminism, you then have males within the society who then become very vocal and then use that as a charge to say, you know what, we must reject feminism and we must reject what this Muslim woman is saying because of her views or her, you know, alignment with what feminism is. But what I want to start the conversation by saying is that feminism for me, as I said, is not the ideals that we see within the Western world. Feminism for me is dictated by the empowerment of women as how Islam has raises the status of women. So when we talk about Islamic dress and modest dress, and we create that narrative around dress because we must, around the male, and you know, we must cover ourselves in front of males, and we must not show our bodies to persons who are our husband. For me, I reject that conversation, because the way that I dress has nothing to do with a man, but more with my relationship with God. And for a long time, we have allowed those conversations to be dictated in those ways. So much so that when we talk about feminism, we're thinking that in many ways, it is a homogenous idea and all feminists act and think the same way. And that's not the case. So if we're talking about intellectual discussion around what feminism looks like, then for me, I bring the concept of faith and how does feminism align to my faith and what is my view on feminism as it pertains to that. And for me, when it's about that, it's about not aligning what I do religiously to the standards of men. I'm not equating myself to the standards of men, but that's not an equation for me. It's about where I am as a woman and my rights and my abilities to pursue what I want to do when I want to do it, and how God has instructed equality for me. So I think it's a difficult discussion to have, because I'm also very conscious of where I stand and how my words may then impact person's ability to connect with the work that we're doing, and or become disconnected from the work that we're doing. And also recognizing that persons that persons that you seek to reach may not be at the level of thinking in terms, and when they may hear you say, I am a feminist, it automatically brings ideas around what that looks like and disconnects you from sort of reaching these support services. So I hope that explains some of the thinking around my answer and so on.
Yeah, you're saying you're kind of hesitant to call yourself feminist, but if feminism simply means women should be treated equally to men, then I think I'm fairly confident that I am also a feminist, right? So
exactly.
so I don't see any problem or any inconsistency with what you are saying, but I can see how others might. So what are your hopes for Barbados, Firhaana? So what are you hoping for in the future? Would you like to see more inclusion in our society? What can we, say, non-members of your faith do to better be aware of the dynamic of how the society, because I may think Barbados is a paradise, but that may not be your perception of our society. How can we as non-Muslims be more aware of the factors that may be impinging upon your freedoms in our society as a minority in our society, and what are your hopes for us going forward into the future?
I think for Barbados, my hope is that we continue to recognize the diversity that exists, that we open spaces for discussion, and we begin to include those voices so that every single individual within the Barbadian landscape has the ability to thrive, and to access the things and the opportunities that they need to thrive. And I say that with no qualms, like that. This is how I would want Barbados to progress. In terms of inclusion, what specifically, I think that when we look to legislation and we look to things like anti-discrimination legislation, it's very important to take into consideration the needs of minority groups, but by extent, minority women, and the very specific challenges that we face with discrimination, whether it's employment based on how we dress, or access to healthcare, even just how we deal with issues of forced marriage or those type of things, or the recognition of different things. So for me, that is where I want us to see a more awareness on the inclusion of all voices in decision making.
I'm gonna ask you a very different type of question. The type of question that I would generally ask a different type of guest, a guest from a regular guest. What do you think right now about our political and social landscape? I generally want to hear this from your position.
I think that I think comparatively, we're in a landscape, or we're with a government that is a lot more open to having conversations and embracing diversity and embracing differences. And as I said, we've seen that before with, for example, the legislation of religious wear. So in terms of our political and social landscape, compared to where it was before, I think we're now I'm very happy with the conversations that are beginning to be had, because I think it opens the door for persons like myself who felt very locked out for a long time to be now involved and feel that we can make some change and make some headway in that regard. But I think too, we're at a sort of a stage within Barbados that it's now about shifting the wheel and reimagining what we want society to look like. I think during this COVID-19 period, we saw the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, which sought us to think about some of the structural inequalities that exist within society. We saw heightened awareness around access to education and healthcare and those type of issues that make us recognize that some of the socioeconomic inequalities that have burdened us for so long are no longer sustainable for as we move forward. So for me, I think we're at a sort of a tipping point, a point where we're now reevaluating. But I'm confident that the government that we have can forge ahead in sort of having those difficult conversations that we need to have to overcome this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and besides your association and Pink Parliament, are there any other ways that you your community have been able to help to effect change politically or socially? And I'm not talking about within the community with your outreach and so forth. I'm talking about in terms of organizations where you can get your issues or whatever issues heard at the highest levels.
Yeah, so I think there have been persons within the community. I wouldn't say so much institutions, but persons, Muslim persons within Barbados who have held positions on boards, on national advisory boards, within religious advisory boards, who have contributed to the change that we want to see, that is not necessarily well known because it's not a political or ministerial position, but it's a position where you work behind the scenes to get things done. And there are numerous persons who have done that and who have contributed in those ways. So I would say yes, those are the type of contributions that are made are being made at this point in time.
Mm-hmm. And you're satisfied with what you're hearing and the feedback that you're getting and the support that you're getting and so forth?
Yeah, I think generally we are satisfied. I feel that there is some things that we should continue to advocate on and advocate for, but I think that we're making good progress given where we're at, and given sort of the fact that the community is now evolving and maturing, and we have younger persons coming up. So I expect in the next 10 to 20 years, it will be a much different conversation, because now you would have the younger persons who have been born and bred here, who've gone through the entire education system, who are now, in itself, Barbadians, without those connections and stereo connections to India and so on. And it'd be a much more different conversation as we see those younger persons come up, particularly women and girls.
Okay, great. Is there anything that you want to say, anything you want to leave with us? I want you to take a few minutes and think about any statement that you want to make. It don't have to be something ever so profound, just anything at all that you want to say. I say that because I don't want you to think that you have to dig, as deep as possible. I just want you to be free and to just say anything you wish to say. You can take a few minutes and do that.
Yeah. I would just want to say, thank you. Of course, first, thank you for having me here, for opening, conversations, opening lines for conversations. And, for persons who have been listening and who have questions and who want to have deeper conversations about some of the things that were said, or even want to question a bit more, to feel free to reach out to me. I am very open to having these types of conversations and delving a bit deeper. I think for me, sometimes as a Muslim woman in the position that I am in, I bear a very huge responsibility, because I'm aware of how my words and my opinions affect persons. And sometimes what I may say may impact someone's ability to even access the resources that BAML has to offer. And I'm very, very conscious of that. And I hold that responsibility very dear to my heart. So if I've offended anyone in anything that I've said, or you feel that I've been conflicted in anything I say, feel free to reach out to me, and we can have a much deeper conversation around that. But I think that even that issue in itself speaks to the volumes of the fact that we don't get to hear Muslim women's voices enough. For me to be conscious of those things means that we're not hearing Muslim women's voices enough. And we need to have more persons other than myself and different faces on shows like these, so that, you know, we no longer feel that we have a burden of all the sisters behind us to represent in a way, but you have multiple voices speaking on issues and multiple perspectives being offered. And I don't feel that when I come on these shows, my narrative is the one narrative that is out there. That's what I don't want, which is why it makes me exceptionally conscious, because I don't want persons going away and thinking this is what Muslim women think, this is what we are, and there's no it's black and white, but it isn't. You know, we're not a homogenous group of women. We're very diverse in our opinions and our perspectives, and I honor that, and I love to see that diversity in perspectives.
Well, for what it's worth, you've done a good job of presenting yourself and the broader community, even though you know your views that you're sharing are your opinion. And I want to thank you again for making us not members of the community, but members of the wider community aware of the issues that you guys are facing. I think that we need to hear more of this because it could inform. It has to inform so many things. It has to inform the policies that we have at primary and secondary schools, because students be aware that we have different groups of people in the class and how to interact with them. So it informs a lot of things, and we need to hear more and more of these type of discussions. Sorry, Ayo, go ahead.
Just saying, it's unfortunate that so many times as women, regardless of what faith, what religion, what sect, what race, that we often feel as though we have to apologize for just having an opinion. And I really hope that at some point in time that we come to a space where we don't. We can just be unapologetic and have our views. But Firhaana, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to thank you for being as candid as you have been. I would like to maintain the connection with you and perhaps have you on another episode in another season, because this is our second to last episode before the end of this season. So I really want to express thanks to you. The audience really liked your presentation. They thought it was very informative. We didn't get a lot of questions tonight, but that is not a reflection of your presentation to us. That's a reflection of the fact that people probably just don't know what to ask because they don't know a lot about your community. So I think a lot of tonight was just them listening and hearing a lot of this stuff for the first time. So I think that is what that was. All right, people like Tai too. She's fully aware, she's fully informed, and so she was able to engage a bit more. But majority of the comments are that this was a great discussion, they enjoyed it, and that you were very informative. Some people expressed concern for things that they grew up seeing. Muslim children leaving the class or the hall when prayers were taking place and being shamed for it, and things like that. So there's that connection, I think, because all of us went to school with Muslim children, even in small numbers at some point in time, primary school or secondary school. I don't think was there always a Muslim school here?
No, wasn't always so, yeah.
Yeah, because I remember more children. I remember the first time I had curry, what those peas are called, was from a little Muslim girl bringing school. When we had, when people bring to school their chickpeas curry. Yeah, that was the first time I ever had it. So at least from that level, we in my time, I'm much older than you because when 9/11 was happening, you were at primary school, and I was in the Barbados Defense Force as a young soldier.
Very
So
nice.
you say that, I was like, oh, she's a baby.
She's a
Right?
millennial.
I'm still a millennial. Shut up. Right. So I'm very grateful to you, and I know our guests, our viewers are also grateful to you, and they enjoyed it. So I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank those of you who, yes, I want to thank those of you who took the time to join us again today and listen to us. Those of you with your comments, your questions, and so forth. I really want to thank you also. If you enjoyed this episode, please share this episode, share our page, and remember that this episode would be posted later on YouTube, so you can invite your friends to also watch it there. And you can invite your friends to join us again right here next Sunday at 5 p.m. And to my co-host, Terry, thank you so much for being here again. And of course, for the hard work that you do, you continue to do to help to produce this show so successfully. Take us away.
Thanks, Ayo. Thanks to you, Farhaana, and thanks to the audience for listening.